Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am the host, and I am late, so I apologize to our live audience. We were off for a week, and you get out of routine, and dinner takes a little bit longer, and yada, yada, yada. But we're here. We're ready to talk some Chargers football, and joining me to that is my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing today?
I'm not going to lie, I'm a bit miserable because when you love your job and you love working with the kids you work with, saying goodbye sucks. And tomorrow I have to say goodbye to half the kids as they take their finals. So Thursday should be interesting. My eyes should be red and I should be all sad and out of tears from all the crying. But yeah, it's the final week of me teaching this year. School year's over for me. Crazy that we're already here.
No fair.
And I just venture into the nothingness that is no football and no school. So I have no job and really no second job because there's no football. So
yeah,
I don't know what I'm going to do, but I might like paint or like a bit of gardening or something. I don't know.
Yeah, pick up a new hobby, I guess. But yeah, we had our big senior day trip last week. It was fun hanging out with our graduates in a non-school setting. I had a student on our trip ask me if I had, quote, normal clothes growing up when I was their age, because she thought that the 2000s was like the old school, like, slacks and shirts, and like you had like the little like, Peaky Blinders thing. She basically thought I was like a Peaky Blinder. That's how we dressed in the 2000s. And I had to explain, no, like how you dress now, that's pretty much how I dressed growing up, graphic tees, baggy shorts, baggy jeans. Like, yeah, that was basically the 2000s.
Yes. Also, hello, Stevie. And I don't know who this other individual was after Stevie, but hello to my two students. One of you I know, one of you I do not know. What's up, guys? This is what I do. I have a life outside of school. I don't live at the school.
Yeah. They always think that we live at school for some reason. I don't know why. That's always been a thing. But yeah, man, school year coming down the home stretch. Excited to, get to some things. So on that note, Tyler and I are going to take a couple of weeks off in June from the podcast. Basically, after the Chargers have mini camp, we'll be off. I'm going to be down in Mexico. Tyler, I think, is going on vacation too. No,
my wife's in school for the next 14 months. So I don't know. I'm just going to maybe go to the lake once. And then I think El Segundo is like my big vacation this year. I think that's my big vacation, going to practice.
Hey man, that's a good vacation for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have a couple of weeks off in June, and then we'll get right back to training camp. And then, as Kevin points out in the chat, 100 days until football as of today. If you're a college football fan, I think that countdown is like in the 80s. So, it's kind of crazy. Like, we're on summer vacation here in the next couple of weeks, and then we're right back into training camp and in the busy season. So we'll have a lot of stuff to cover, everything for you guys as we get prepared for training camp. Obviously, it's going to be a new experience for us up in El Segundo, like Tyler mentioned. A lot of things to discuss and be able to figure out how this team is going to do that. And so we figured we'll revisit this topic after we get some practices and things like that. But we wanted to start today to do our kind of an essential, way too early predicting the training camp battles of 2024. Obviously, this is kind of like a play on the whole like mock draft thing, way too early type deal. So we have a few training camp battles that we're going to discuss. We'll talk about some winners, some roles. In some of the positions is not necessarily like who's going to be the starter. Obviously, there are roles that will be sorted out as well in terms of the depth pieces. So we'll have some things to discuss there, and should be a fun discussion today.
Yeah, it will be. Again, too early, very early. We get it. It's May. But I do like having this and like putting a pin in this now. So when training camp starts, we can revisit it and then actually like really start predicting these winners and see how things change and our perception of each of these players changes.
Yeah, and we got Tyler's whole class in here, it looks like.
I guess my whole class is here. So you don't get extra credit. Sorry. So you bombed the final, whatever. But I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so let's dive into these training camp battles. Again, these are positions that we want to highlight. I think the biggest question marks on the Chargers roster. We do have a slideshow as always, and we'll get to diving into this. And like the slideshow says here on the screen, yes, it is early, but we want to discuss it before we get to the summer break, and then we'll get more information and we'll revisit this conversation down the road. Okay, so we thought it was only right that we started with the starting outside corner duo. Obviously, the Chargers, if you watch the Jesse Minter mic'd up, I think they're going to be playing a lot of nickel formation on defense. I think that's kind of going to be a big emphasis of theirs. So that slot corner spot, certainly important, but we want to focus strictly on the outside corner duo. And so in each of these slides, we're going to be highlighting who is returning, who was signed, who was drafted or undrafted. And for the outside cornerback duo, obviously you have returning Asante Samuel Jr. and Dean Leonard, both of whom played some decent snaps last year. Obviously, Asante was a starter. And then you have Kristian Fulton featured in the thumbnail and here on the screen. And then drafted was Cam Hart. So I think one of the things that we talked about after the draft and after they hired Jesse Minter, like all this stuff, we've kind of hinted at it here. But I think my biggest question mark with this group is how does Asante Samuel Jr. fit into this group? Is he a slot guy for this regime? Is he as I forget his first name, Coach Klinksko put, is he a third down nickel and a early down outside corner? What is Asante Samuel Jr.'s role? And then, if you're buying the OTA buzz, he's having a great start to OTA, but this is kind of Asante's MO, right? Like when there's no pads on, no hitting, he's great because he is able to take away the football. So my biggest question mark of this group, I would say, is how Asante Samuel Jr. fits into things with this new regime intact.
Yeah, I would agree. It's certainly not a talent thing, but now that we've seen multiple years of him playing, we do have more question marks and some that haven't been answered since he was drafted. Maybe it's a size thing, it's a run defense thing, whatever, but a lot of those things haven't been answered. And he is a very boom or bust player. But I think what he does so well will allow him to stay on the outside. I don't see him playing in the slot here. And I definitely don't see him playing in the slot with them investing in Tarheeb Still over Cam Hart, who's also on here, but more projected to be the outside guy. So sure, in certain instances, is Asante Samuel Jr. going to be in the slot? Yeah, probably. Like they're not going to just do, he's the outside and that's it kind of guy. But I think for the most part, he's your outside guy. So to me, he's an outside guy. I don't think he plays much in the slot, if at all. And then it comes down to either Fulton or Hart for that second spot.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think Asante, he just offers a skill set that the other guys don't really have. Like I think Kristian Fulton has the potential to be a take away the football type of corner. But he's more, I think, of like at his peak, I think he would be more of kind of like a 2019, 2020 Casey Hayward type where he just plays that side of the ball really, really well. And he's not going to take away the football a ton. It's just more of kind of zone instincts and things like that. At least it's kind of the impression that I've gotten of him. Whereas Asante, like his role is very clear. Like he's going to be aggressive. He's going to take chances. He's going to take away the football. He's also going to get beat and give up some yards. They don't really have anybody else like that. I think Cam Hart had like 2 interceptions in his career, and 2 of them were in the same game, as much as I like the player, obviously. And Dean Leonard hasn't exactly had a strong history of taking the football away. So that was one of the things that Joe Ortiz highlighted about, I forget who he was talking to. I think it might have been with Chris Long, where he was like asked, like, what are you going to do for Justin Herbert? And his answer was like, well, we believe in taking the football away. We believe in, forcing third downs and getting out of the field and maximizing our possessions. And I think Asante is a key part in that. He is their most productive, interceptor of passes. And I think his role is pretty safe for me in terms of starting. But I do have a question in terms of like, do they put him in the slot or not? I think that's really kind of where that starts and where that focus is.
Yeah, I agree. So to me, this comes down to Asante Samuel Jr. locked in on the outside, and it's Fulton or Hart. Leonard, I do like him maybe in one more year. I think it's just a little bit too early, especially with the new regime. I think if it were still the same regime with the same defensive coordinator with Brenden Staley, maybe it's Dean Leonard that starts on the outside. But with a new regime, I think it ends up being Kristian Fulton. So for me, my prediction right now, until things change, it's Sant and it's Kristian Fulton, with Cam Hart being that guy. Both guys got predicted to be gone next year. So I think Cam Hart slides into that role next season. I like him a ton, but you do have to consider the fact that maybe while you and I had a 3rd round grade on him, he did, for maybe different reasons, fallen to round 5, and he was picked after Tarheeb Still for them. So
Yeah.
I don't know if they're ready to put him out there as a starter just yet, even though we do like him.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think Fulton, I think he's highly motivated at this stage of his career. He is somebody who is going to want to come in and make an impression. I'm not going to say that his spot is like guaranteed. I do think they do have some competition there for sure. But I do expect Fulton as the veteran, as the guy coming in here, with the contract. It's not a huge contract, but I think if he maximizes his earnings, he can get up across $4 million. So it's a pretty decent contract. Like if you look at, 1-year cornerback contracts, it's kind of that range of outcomes. So I think in a best case scenario, it is Asante and Kristian, and both of those players are performing well. They have, fit this defense pretty well. And that is something that Kristian Fulton talked about. He didn't feel like the Tennessee Titans defense, maximized his skill set. And hopefully this regime is able to do that. But I think the best possible version of the outside cornerback duo in 2024 is Asante and Kristian Fulton, because like you mentioned, I think Dean still has some development to do. I think Cam has some health questions to answer, and we don't really know like what it's going to be like right away. Rookie cornerbacks can be very hit or miss. So I do kind of expect it to be Asante and Kristian, and then we'll kind of see how the other guys develop.
Yeah, I agree. Cam Hart, hopefully there's no lingering issues, but while all these guys do have potential, Leonard obviously has potential, Hart definitely has potential as a rookie. I feel like they, in kind of a last year sort of thing to see how Zont pairs, Kristian Fulton on a 1-year deal. I think they want to see if they can mine the most out of these guys and then let them hit the open market maybe and get second contracts with another team and get like a comp pick that way. So I don't know if both end up leaving, although they could just take a corner in the first round next year. But
sure.
I think it's Zont, Fulton, and then we can get into slot corner next.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The compensatory pick thing, I think these two are probably I would say have the most potential there. But at the same time, the Chargers have like $100 million in cap space next year. So, jumping ahead, obviously, but I don't know how much really they're going to have compensatory pick potential next year.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the starting slot corner here. Tyler, obviously not a great group here. You have Ja'Sir Taylor returning, Tarheeb Still drafted, and then Thomas Harper, who's technically listed as a safety, but again, I think he's a slot guy through and through. I think, I don't know, like, what's your biggest question? All of it? I don't know.
Yes. No, seriously, my biggest question, honestly, is how many snaps is Derwin James playing in the slot?
Yeah.
How involved is he as kind of that slot guy for them? Because you cannot sit here and definitively say that you feel great about any of these three guys being a starter this year right away. How many snaps do they have to play? I don't know, but they're going to be out there quite a bit. It's not like Michigan, for example, didn't use the slot corner last year. Maybe we wanted a certain slot corner at 37 potentially. So this one's very tricky because I just don't know enough about these guys. I thought Ja'Sir Taylor has had some good moments and some really awful moments. I thought in camp he started rough, ended better. Obviously his spot is secure. With Ficken, with special teams, his spot is secure. So that part, obviously, I'm not worried about. Yeah. It's just who's going to start. And again, with Tarheeb Still, clearly they like him. They liked him over Cam Hart, who we really liked. They see a lot in him. I think some of the traits and the ways he plays make sense for the team. But again, it is round 5. So how do you weigh starting someone who's got a lot of work to do? They saw him play outside. They saw him play inside, more so inside this past year. Do they think he's ready? Do they think he's got it all down at this point? Are they willing to take that quote unquote risk and put the rookie out there? And then Thomas Harper, again, like you said, safety. But, I agree with the slot corner part. Even if he is considered a safety, his best shot of making it is as a slot corner.
Yeah.
So, not over Dent, I don't think, who would be the safety. So this one's tough for me. Ja'Sir Taylor obviously has the experience. He's not too far off in terms of round drafted. There's a big gap in number, but still round 5 versus round 6. So it's not like, Tarheeb Still's the second round pick, which would make this obvious. So yeah, the whole thing for me is a giant question mark. I'm wondering how much Derwin plays. If I had to guess right now, I would lean new regime, my guys, and Tarheeb Still, especially with the way Joel Ortiz talked about him. So for now, I will say Tarheeb still ends up starting in the slot. That will be kind of a theme for me, is that this regime, new regime, their guys, they end up signing or starting, excuse me. But yeah, I don't, it's a coin. I'm wrong and it's Thomas Harper in the end. I go great. Like I wouldn't be surprised, honestly.
Yeah, Kevin points out biggest question. Yes, it's really how I feel. I mean, I think my biggest struggle with this is that the weaknesses of Jamaree Taylor are all coverage related, and the weaknesses of Tarheeb Still are all coverage related. They're both good tacklers. They both can defend the run. They both can blitz. I think, Tarheeb Still, I would say, probably has, more, a more heavy ball skills profile than Jamaree Taylor would have.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Tarheeb Still, his production should not be ignored. But it's like they have the same kind of zone coverage weaknesses. They have the same kind of man coverage weaknesses. They both have shorter arms. They both are not super fluid in their hips. They're kind of the same player. So it's just kind of like frustrating for me. Like, man, like it's just a big question mark. So the player I feel most comfortable with in terms of coverage here is Thomas Harper. I do think he has the best coverage ability of the three. But are you going to start an undrafted free agent corner at slot? I don't know. It's going to be tough for him to make the roster, I would say, because like you mentioned, Jamaree Taylor's special teams role is pretty entrenched, I would say. He's a great gunner. He's fantastic on punt return. He, just has that innate ability to make those plays, and Ficken loves him. So then you're talking about the starting spot, and can Thomas Harper do enough to start over Tarheeb Still, who they did draft? I don't know. So I think this is potentially a position where they look at the veteran market, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, I do kind of tend to agree that until we see otherwise, I think Tarheeb Still should be considered the favorite to start there.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, and that's the thing. For some of these groups, we could just say placeholder because it could be a veteran at this point.
Yeah.
The Chargers or even the Ravens, like they've signed guys post draft. Chargers already have. So, what's Bryce Callahan up to? I don't know what he's up to. Did he retire? No. So
he didn't play last year. So
right, which again is so strange to me because he was like the good part of the defense that didn't work. Like of all the things that went wrong with the Chargers defense, it usually wasn't Bryce Callahan.
Yeah.
So whatever.
Yeah. Bryce Callahan in 2022 was probably the best slot I have seen in a Chargers uniform since like Casey Hayward's first season in San Diego. Like he was just locking down. Well, Desmond King was more of an explosive playmaker. I think like down to down consistency, I would say Bryce Callahan, but it's neither here nor there, I guess. But anyway, I do think this is a spot I would like to see either. Like it's so tricky because we do want to see Derwin James play in the slot more.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have to sign a veteran safety. So it's just kind of like they just need another body in the secondary, basically, is what we're saying.
What's that? You want to talk about linebacker? Dang it, we put the linebacker slide in. I had the safety transition in there. I forgot we had a linebacker.
Sorry, that was
no, you're good.
But yeah, Kevin Kernick asking about the speed nickel and Mr. Deion Henley. So the linebacker position is certainly going to be interesting to watch. Troy Dye in here as well. So returning, obviously, you have Deion Henley, last year's 2023 third round draft pick. Nick Neiman, who started over Deion Henley for some games last season. He was a 2021 draft pick. The return of Denzel Perryman, and then obviously signing Troy Dye. And then they drafted our guy, Junior Colson, Navarro Bowman's guy, Junior Colson, already calling play his guy, Junior Colson. So we're going to talk about this, I think, in different roles.
Mm-hmm.
I think our expectation is that Junior Colson is one of these starting linebackers. Is that safe to say?
Oh yeah, that's easy. I honestly I don't think there should be a debate that it's Perryman and Colson as the starting duo.
Yeah. So you do expect it to be Perryman then?
Yeah, yes. If we're picking a duo, Perryman and Colson. If early on Perryman is the primary guy, and then Colson works his way up, fine. But I do think that if it's a duo out there, it is those two.
Yeah, I think the room construction is super interesting to me because Henley, Neiman, and Dye all have like pretty heavy coverage profiles. And then you have Deion, Denzel, and Junior that I think all blitz really well. And then Junior and Denzel, I think, are your like obviously your main run stuffing linebackers. Like they're the two best in that regard. So I do think that Denzel, has a role, and it's going to be tough for these younger guys to beat him out in training camp. But I think eventually, like, they're just going to need to get to, more coverage heavy units, especially if they're going to play as many nickel snaps and you don't have like a slot you trust. So I definitely think that there's a role for a third linebacker to play a lot of snaps. That to me is kind of more of the question mark, because Henley did not play over Neiman last year. This regime didn't draft either of those two players. They signed Troy Dye. So there's a lot of competition for linebacker 3, and I think that is almost more interesting to me than who is technically like starting.
How many linebackers did they keep active on game day usually? At least 4, probably 5.
The previous regime was always 5, and they had like 6 on the roster for the most part. Because Amon was on it always for special teams. Neiman was on it. And then you had Kendricks and obviously Kenneth Murray, the Tranquil Kaiser Wright rotation days. So they almost always had 6 on the roster, and then you keep 5 active on game days for special teams purposes.
Okay. I was just trying to work through maybe Deion Henley only isn't active or is somehow not as much a part of it because Troy Dye's their guy. Nick Neiman might be the better special teamer. Perryman, Colson start. But yeah, if you have 5 active on game day, then there's a role for Henley there. Yeah, no, that's a really good point though about the coverage aspect of things. But then is it Neiman or is it Henley or is it Dye? Their guy, their specific guy that they brought in.
Yeah. Jesse Minter did speak pretty highly of Troy Dye at the end of his Mike Up video.
That's so tough. Like Neiman in terms of defense is going to be, I think, the 5th guy. But then if he's picking this guy and he's like, who heaps praise on Neiman for being a captain on defense, like, I don't know. You don't think they just give it to Colson? You don't think Colson just ends up being that coverage guy?
I'm saying to potentially like spell Perryman, because I think Colson is linebacker 1. I think he is always on the field.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
then I think Perryman is the one who would come off for a coverage or a blitzer linebacker.
Gotcha. I don't know. My heart is always with Neiman, and I've wanted him to succeed, but obviously then Henley I'm pretty good about too. But then Dye.
Yeah.
Oh man, how do I answer this one?
Well, what I will say is I think this kind of conversation paints a more positive picture about the linebacker room than like maybe outsiders are going to have looking at this room. Like, I think there's obviously a risk that Junior Colson doesn't hit the ground running as much as we would hope. But at the same time, he knows the defense better than anybody else on the team right now.
Yeah.
And so I think like my point here is that the Chargers actually have a lot of good depth to the linebacker room that I have become more of a fan of throughout this process. And there's a lot of variety of roles here. There's a lot of different skill sets. The special teams aspect of it should be pretty high. And then if somebody gets injured, you're not like, you have a guy like Nick Neiman who's played. You have a guy like Deion Henley who you drafted recently. You have Denzel Perryman who we know can play at a high level. You have Troy Dye who they seem to like. So I think doing this exercise made me feel much better about the depth than I think I did entering today. So I think that is part of the aspect here that I did want to highlight too.
Yeah. All right, so I'll go Colson is the number 1 guy. Perryman will start in early downs, and I'll say Henley's the 3rd guy. Feels like a cop-out, but...
Yeah, I do think that's kind of how I see it as well. I think Henley's just too athletic, man. I think he's really going to...
Good blitzer.
A lot of fans are hyping him up as a like overall breakout season. I think that's next year. I think he plays like more of a supporting role this year. But I do agree he probably is linebacker 3 for me as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I heard barking outside. I did.
No, you're good. Okay, now is the safety conversation. Lots of defensive ones to start off. Obviously, a lot of question marks on defense. So for the safety 3 role, you obviously have returning JT Woods, drafted in 2022. AJ Finley, 2023 undrafted free agent. And then nobody signed. And then you have drafted Jalyn Phillips and Akeem Dent, obviously undrafted, excuse me. So not a ton of resources poured into the safety position here. There hasn't been a ton of buzz about this group at OTAs so far. It's only been 1 week. But how are you feeling about this group, Tyler?
How do I feel about this group? It's strange because you and I liked AJ Finley last year. I like Jalen Phillips. You like Jalen Phillips. We like Akeem Dent. So like there's guys on here. It's like, yeah, they can make the roster and develop into something that'd be awesome. But like when it comes down to it, week 1, and you need a third safety out there. No, I do not feel good about this group. I don't feel confident in this group. Again, there's potential. JT Woods has been nothing but potential so far. We get the potential. There's something there. Maybe. Is this regime going to figure it out? I don't know. The strange thing, though, is that there is nobody else that they brought in. There wasn't a guy that they drafted, even in the round 7. There wasn't a guy that they even signed. It is JT Woods, and basically what amounts to 3 undrafted free agents, with Finley being a former UDFA, but not exactly playing a ton. So it's tough for me because I bounce around this idea that, well, if they didn't bring anybody else in, maybe they feel really good about JT Woods. Like, I'm trying to buy into this idea that maybe, hey, because no one else is out there, maybe they feel good about JT Woods. And maybe they do. But honestly, this feels like the most placeholder of the spots that we're going to talk about. With slot corner, I could get Jaw Taylor starting, Tarheeb Still starting. I don't know about JT Wood starting or any of these guys starting. Now, another guy could make the roster. 2 of these guys could make the roster, or the UDFAs, I should say. I think this is a placeholder. I don't know. And Tony Jefferson literally just announced like, hey, I'm coming out of retirement. And I worked for the Ravens last year. So that's definitely a possibility. But yeah, I don't see how this isn't another veteran guy. Again, if people are asking for big name safeties, give me Dean Marlowe. Give me anybody who's just a veteran who can go out there and say, hey, I've actually played 1,000 football snaps before. And I played for a couple of years where I was just always the third guy. Great. They got to find somebody else, though. I just can't imagine this is really the group. And we had high hopes for JT Woods. We watched him in training camp. He improved. That was the thing that was discussed, reported on. We felt it. It was evident. It was even evident in the preseason to a certain extent. And then it was just like nothing. Just the whole JT Woods experience just right before us out there on the field. Like it just didn't happen. And then he was out for whatever reason. So I don't know, man. I think it ends up being a veteran.
Yeah, I think if this were the list for safety 4, I would feel better, obviously. But these are guys who right now, if something happens to Derwin or Alohi, or again, if Derwin plays the slot, these guys are starters. Like they're going to play a ton of nickel. They need defensive backs out there. And I think, 3 of these guys, JT Woods, AJ Finley, and Akeem Dent, I think are natural, like free safety types that can play the center of the field, that have a skill set that they need, but there's just not enough out there. I mean, Jalen Hawkins was the third safety for the most part after JT Woods went down with his illness thing last year. And Jalen Hawkins, I think, is in New England, I want to say. So this is definitely a position where I'm like, okay, like this is like a neon blinking sign, like go sign a veteran free agent at this point in time. Yeah. And maybe we didn't do like a good enough job of like highlighting the need for drafting a safety. And if we didn't, that's on me. But I did expect them to address the position somehow. Like I didn't expect them to just run back JT Woods, AJ Finley, and then sign 2 undrafted free agents. So they need some kind of veteran depth in here. And I think that player starting at, being the safety 3 just makes more sense. And then you have these 4 guys who can battle it out for safety 4. That just makes so much more sense to me. It's so much more logical to have these guys down a roll, and you don't have to rely on them and put that much pressure on them to play right away. And if this were the first year that they had just drafted JT Woods, like I would get it, but sure. We've barely seen him. So it's just, this is probably, I think, the biggest question mark overall on the roster at this point in time.
Yeah, it was tough because this wasn't exactly much of a safety class. There's a couple guys we definitely liked, but it was kind of like linebacker. So like, yeah, the Chargers got the Junior Colson end of that one. Great. but it's not like they were going to find someone who was really great after, on day 3. I didn't do a lot of homework there anyway, so maybe someone that I didn't, but wasn't a great group. There's always a position that's ignored. This year it was center, and then it was safety. So we'll see how they do with center, which we're already worried about, but that just kind of feels like it's set. As far as safety, yeah, I think it's a veteran. Whoever it is, it's a name we'll go, oh, great. And like, it doesn't matter where they came from. If he, like Kevin says, if he's any bit recognizable, awesome. I just think, or at least make it a fair fight. So it's a veteran and JT Woods. And if JT Woods wins and he's a safety 3, fine, great. But at least you like put something out there to try to make this a legit battle for the best guy possible. Because right now it is just JT Woods is the 3rd guy, and then AJ Finley's the 4th guy. And that's not great.
Yeah, AJ Finley has a role on special teams, obviously, and AJ Finley, is a guy that Ryan Ficken developed pretty well into that role. Like Jasir Taylor, made some very key plays as a gunner. He did become that kind of guy once Dean Leonard was starting and injured. AJ Finley stepped up in a big way, and obviously, guys will develop and guys can step up. But I think everybody in this chat and everybody listening to this on replay will feel much better about this position if they would go out and sign some kind of veteran type, because it just gives them more flexibility. And that's been a key thing of the offseason, right? Depth, flexibility. It's why you sign a Bud Dupree. It's why you bring in Denzel Perryman. It's why you bring in Hayden Hurst, like these guys who can, provide you that kind of options, and they just don't have that at safety right now. And it's, I'm knocking on wood, obviously, thoroughly knocking on wood that Derwin James stays healthy, but we're not too far removed from Derwin James having some injury prolonged seasons. He didn't have his best season last year overall. So I think you do need another body here that can step in and play some capable football for whenever Derwin plays the slot, somebody's injured, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like the thought of JT Woods starting and playing 100% of the snaps right now makes me a little anxious and a little more anxious in May than I would like to be looking at this roster.
Yeah, because I know it's not the 17-0, 17 games won in the regular season kind of year that might be next year. So maybe there's less pressure to have to find a guy. Sure. At the same time, they've got a 4th edge rusher in Bud Dupree as insurance. So I think, I don't think they have to spend mega resources to go get the safety, but yeah, they'll have someone else out there.
All right. I think, we have some offensive ones to get to now. Obviously, the starting right guard. No additions. This is all returning players. Trey Pipkins, Jamaree Salyer, and Jordan McFadden. For what it's worth, Pipkins and Salyer have been rotating at OTAs, and it sounds like that's going to be continued. I have not seen Salyer play much right tackle, so it looks like he is firmly a guard with this regime. Based off of OTA stuff, and obviously he has the flexibility to kick out when necessary. But Trey is bouncing inside, bouncing outside. They're trying to figure out where he is best suited. So Tyler, what are your thoughts as we kind of, look into the future here about Trey Pipkins and where he aligns? What's up with Jamaree Salyer? Where do you want to start that conversation?
To me, it's more so the question of, okay, let's say Trey Pipkins is the starting guard. What happens if one of the tackles goes down? So let's say Alt goes down and Slater goes down. Is Jamaree Salyer your swing, and do you feel comfortable with that? Or are you now taking, after Trey Pipkins fought and won for the right guard spot, are you now taking him out of that right guard spot to put in the loser of that battle and putting Trey Pipkins out at tackle? Do they want to shuffle that much? That's the part that's a bit more of a hang up for me. Like if they had another true swing tackle type, I guess, then maybe you could work yourself and convince yourself to Trey Pipkins being the starting guard. My issue is that I don't really know where that leaves the backup group here of the swing tackles. Like maybe Jamaree can play some tackle, and it's not like he hasn't, but there's a lot of revisionist history sometimes with how Jamaree has played, and it's a bit of like rose-colored glasses because it was so admirable what he did and so tremendous that he was able to pull off what he did with no reps, no ramp up, nothing. Yeah, he really, truly almost saved their season. But like objectively, it was not a great year. Statistically, it was not a great year. And unfortunately, he didn't improve last year either. Granted, that was at guard. So I think Trey Pipkins just ends up being the swing and Jamaree sticks at right guard. That's how I currently feel. I don't think the undrafted free agent guys that we didn't list here have a shot of being a starter this year, barring injury. So I think Jamaree is a starter at guard. I think Trey is that true swing tackle. And even if you feel like Pipkins maybe is a tiny bit better, if a fan feels that Pipkins could be a tiny bit better at guard, I'd much rather have him ready in the off chance that Slater, who's not been healthy the last 2 seasons, gets injured. Pipkins can step out there and be the swing tackle. I don't feel as comfortable with Jamaree doing that.
Yeah, I think I'm just at the point where, yes, I obviously agree with you that Jamaree's offensive tackle play was more admirable than it was like good tackle play. Guard, I think it did not go super smoothly for him. But I still think that's where he's best suited. And I still think that Trey, where he's best suited, is as an offensive tackle. So I understand what they're doing. They're trying to get the best 5 out there. And they, at least initially after the draft, felt like Trey was one of the 5 best players, which I can understand. I do think that Trey overall is a better football player than Jamaree, but it's kind of like a square peg in a round hole type deal for me, putting Trey at guard. I think putting him there just because you think he's a better overall football player, to me, makes less sense than putting the actual better guard in at right guard. So I understand what they're doing in kind of cross training them right now. I think it makes all the sense in the world to see what Trey can do at guard, see if he is more comfortable there.
Yeah.
And he might be. I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm not there every single day in practice, but just from what I've seen on tape with him, I think his issues would be more noticeable at guard, and I think Jamaree's issues are more noticeable at tackle. So it's just kind of Jamaree's a guard and Trey's a tackle to me. Like, I think that's kind of where we're going to end up at. So I tend to agree. Maybe this is a position where they do the whole OTAs and they're flip-flopping, and then they just get to their summer spots and they're like, hey, you know what? Like, we'd really like to see some other competition in here as well. Maybe that's McFadden. Maybe that's a free agent. I don't know. But I just think that when all is said and done, it's going to result in these guys playing their natural positions, which is tackle and for Pipkins and guard for Salyer.
Just imagining, you kind of already answered the question, but imagining Trey Pipkins last year and most of his years outside of his better season, imagining he was a senior in college football, would there be any consideration, like looking at him, would people be making the tackle to guard conversation with him at all, or would they just view him as a tackle? Like, if you had to view him,
I think he's firmly a tackle. And they might just they might think, hey, we just need our best 5 out there and we'll figure it out. But I tend to think that Trey's a natural tackle. I don't think he's a guard. Maybe he can play it. Maybe that's kind of a placeholder deal until McFadden is ready or whatever the case may be. But I just think that Trey at guard is not going to go as well as people think it will. And again, it's not as easy. This isn't a guy who has naturally just like played multiple positions. Like, he was strictly a left tackle in college. He was strictly an offensive tackle so far in his career. Like, is he 30? He's past 30 or close to 30.
Trey?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, he's been in the league for like 7 years at this point.
Trey's only had one new contract last year, right?
He turns 20. He turns 28 in the fall. Okay. Either way, this is a guy he's been in the NFL for quite some time. So I think this is a guy I think he's a tackle. I think he's going to stay as a tackle. But it's just, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know how I feel about the offensive line as a whole without Corey Linsley, and then you have Bradley Bozeman, Zion Johnson, and Jamaree. I don't know. There's a lot of potential, but I don't know. It's a lot of question marks too.
Yeah. All righty. Let's go to the interior defensive line group. Oh, we ended up back on defense. Just kidding. Back to defense, guys.
Oops, my bad. So obviously for the returning guys, this is probably the only group where you have a ton of returners. So you have Morgan Fox, the big free agent, not big free agent, but re-signed in 2023 to a good deal. Otito Ogbonia, former draft pick, Christopher Hinton, undrafted free agent, and former Michigan Wolverine. You have Scott Matlock, former draft pick of this team, Gerard Clark, and CJ Okoye. And then the team signed Poona Ford and drafted Justin Eboigbe and signed Michael Mason. I think there are two roles that are really safe for this team in terms of this position group. And I think the first one is Poona Ford being kind of an every down player for them. And then Morgan Fox is your pass rushing defensive tackle.
Mm-hmm.
I think outside of that, the rest is kind of up for grabs, Tyler.
Oh yeah, no, I would definitely agree, and I think that it's anybody's best camp, and then we'll see. Well, sorry, in terms of roles, yes, Fox and Ford, but like Eboigbe's safe on the roster. But yeah, no, it's anybody's game.
So I guess you have different roles here on kind of across the board. But the more I've thought about this room and the way that they've kind of talked about him, I kind of expect Justin Eboigbe to be a starter for this team. Am I crazy to think that right now?
No, not at all. I mean, they said they had a second or third round grade on him too. So they
Right.
viewed him as a day 2 player. And honestly, if not for the medical, which could be a hindrance here too, but if not for that, they might have taken him over like a Junior Colson potentially. So yeah, I don't think you're crazy at all. So would that be then, by starter, do you mean one of the 2 most snaps playing defensive tackles, or you mean like, or like, sorry, a strong part of a rotation starter, or do you mean like he is like over Poona Ford starter? Or
No, not over Poona Ford. I think Poona Ford is essentially DT1 is like the safest bet of this group. But my thought process is almost like Eboigbe is your third defensive tackle in base formation, and he's like your early down run defense guy opposite of Ford, and him and Fox kind of rotate, and then Otito kind of rotates in after that. That's kind of where I lean right now.
Yeah.
But I think all 4 of those guys play a lot. I just think that Eboigbe is going to play more than some people think, especially outside of the Chargers fandom.
Yeah. And that'd be great. I mean, we liked him quite a bit.
Yeah.
So then if it's Fox, if it's Ford, if it's Eboigbe, I kind of feel like Hinton's the next most safe guy, which is strange because Otito has the he's
draft
the draft status. But I think there's some familiarity with Hinton, obviously. And I'd heard that they kind of like Hinton more than Otito, or like everyone else after that is a bit more shaky. So Hinton has a bit more sure footing with both familiarity and the way he plays. And that Otito and Matlock and these guys, they're more so on the bubble. And so that there could be aiming to keep 5 of these guys, which would be Fox, Ford, Eboigbe, and then it's just kind of a battle after that where Hinton kind of has the early lead right now.
So you're saying that you have Hinton over Otito then?
Currently, yes.
Do you think they carry more than 5?
I've heard it was 5. So I don't know if they do or not. Unless the only reason I can see them keeping 6 is if Eboigbe is something with his medicals are funky.
Gotcha. So then we're talking about Scott Matlock not being on this team.
Potentially. You're assuming that he doesn't win out over Otito then. Because if he beats Otito and they want maybe more of a pass rusher type, I don't know, then he could win out. So I think it's 5. I think where it more so is disappointing for fans is with like Okoye or Clark. Okoye doesn't have an exemption this year, does he?
In terms of not counting against the 90?
Yeah.
He does still have that exemption.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I take that back.
Yeah. And I think the same applies for keeping him on the practice squad as well.
Okay. Okay. So that's possible. So yeah, I think it's Fox, Ford, Eboigbe, Hinton, and then one of Ogboni or Matlock.
Yeah, I think if that's the case, I think you keep Otito because I think Matlock's skill set is kind of redundant with Eboigbe, and I definitely trust Eboigbe to play more over Matlock at this point in time.
Yeah, I'd go with that. I know Tito's the biggest body they'd have too. Like they need someone who's he's 326 or whatever he is.
Yeah. So you need somebody who can be Puna's backup essentially
Yeah.
on rundowns. And right now, Puna kind of said that they're moving him all across the line, but he expects like nose tackle to be his main role.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only other nose tackles here are obviously Otito and then Gerard Clark and CJ Okoye. And I don't trust either of those players to make impacts. CJ Okoye is a fantastic story, but people are talking about him like he was this amazing player in the preseason, which like super cool story.
Yeah.
But like relative to the scale that we're talking about here. So I don't trust him, and I don't think the Chargers will trust him to play like key defensive snaps. I think Otito is that guy that we see, we saw the glimpses of him as a rookie, and then unfortunately the injury issue popped up. But I think we're going to see Otito make a nice little leap forward here, and I think he's your backup nose tackle basically.
Yeah, and I'd be totally cool with that. Next up, unless we passed it, wide receiver number 3.
Wide receiver number 3. Yep.
Cool. So this is already a bit of a reach for me because the assumption is that Josh Palmer and Ladd McConkey are the starting 1 and 2. That's technically not 100% true or for sure just yet.
Yeah.
But it's whatever. I think one of those guys is 1, one of those guys is 2. So to me, it's about wide receiver 3, and that's between first round pick Quentin Johnston from last year, returner Derius Davis, and then they just signed DJ Chark, and then they also just drafted Brenden Rice and Cornelius Johnston. So plenty of bodies, plenty of solid depth for a wide receiver 3. The question just becomes: is it? To me, is it a my guy in DJ Chark and what they've paid him to be potentially up to $5 million, or is it Quentin Johnston who bears the most draft status in the contract? Like all that is there, and supposedly Joe Ortiz said they liked him coming out of the draft. So I don't know. Maybe there's a whole different world where he's a Raven, but to me, it's between Johnston and Chark, with Rice and Johnson. Eventually maybe getting there, just not this year.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think Derius Davis and his role is pretty secure. Like it's really cool that he's doing the deep shot thing at OTAs right now, but I think he's a gadget player for this team right now, and I think he's a complementary piece, not somebody who's going to be a starter. I do tend to agree that Palmer and Ladd, that should be your 1 and 2. I think those 2 are the 2 best players of that group right now. So I think you highlighted this the right way. I think it is Quentin versus Chark. I don't know how I feel about that because Quentin as an X isn't my favorite thing in the world. Like I think he's much better suited off the ball as a backside Z, whereas Chark I think is exclusively an X. Like what he does best is play the boundary. He's the more physical player at this point in time. I would like to see Quentin have more like run after catch opportunities and be able to be in motion more often. So the roles are different, and maybe that kind of makes you be a little bit more flexible here. But you're talking about 2 players who graded very poorly in separation on reception perception. DJ Chark had a really bad year in Carolina. I had a person who covered the team say that he was like their 4th or 5th best wide receiver last year, and that receiver group was dumpster fire. No. So you're obviously hoping that you get DJ Chark from 2022 here. And if you get 2022 DJ Chark, that guy might be enough to start over Quentin Johnston. If you're talking to me about 2023 DJ Chark, that guy is not enough to start over Quentin Johnston. So I guess it's kind of, that's the biggest question mark outside of what does Quentin develop into, is what version of DJ Chark are you getting? If you're getting Detroit Lions DJ Chark, that guy probably starts over Quentin, unless Quentin takes like a huge leap forward. So it just, that's kind of where I'm at with those 2. Different roles, different question marks. But I think if Chark is really checked in, if he has really put in the work, if he has good rapport with Justin, I think Chark starts the season at least as your wide receiver 3.
I think I tend to agree.
Sad, but
which would be very sad. Yes. I think that if you had gone with a second or a different receiver in round 2 than McConkey, then I could see you working through Quentin Johnston. But Ladd McConkey can do all the yak things, and he's fast and can work down the field, and he can actually run routes and catch with his hands as far as I'm aware. So yeah, I think DJ Chark presents just a different element. Now, if we find out like he's washed, he's slow, the injuries have caught up, he's not himself anymore, then I don't think this is even really a discussion.
Yeah.
But they're paying him a decent amount. And again, the incentives are there for him to, if he can get on the field and work on getting on the field. Yeah. God, I can't believe we're saying this. Like, listen, you and I weren't like diehard QJ fans, but I didn't think we'd be at this point this year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right now, Palmer, McConkey, and I think Chark are your 1, 2, 3. They just bring something different that the other guys don't quite have. The only reason I can see them going with Quentin is they view Lad a bit differently, and QJ has more of a yak role, I guess. Or Johnston he's just younger and on a rookie contract, and former first round picks. You might as well see what you have.
Yeah, I think it's pretty telling that we have a Jacksonville Jaguars DJ Chark picture up here also.
Yeah,
but it's just like I think the roles are more complementary if Chark is out there. Again, he has to be locked in. He has to be like himself as opposed to who he was last year. And I don't know if that was an injury thing. I don't know if that was him mentally checking out. But if Chark is locked and ready to go, I think he is your wide receiver 3, at least to start the season until they figure out what Quentin is. Like, I think there's just such a question mark around what does Quentin do well right now. Whereas with Chark, we know that he can play the boundary. We know that he can be a jump ball guy. We know that he's a physical, X receiver. We don't really know with Quentin right now.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, though, if this is 2023 DJ Chark, like, he's not starting. Like, that player last year was not a starting caliber wide receiver. So
yeah,
if you are holding on to Quentin Johnston stock, you're kind of hoping that DJ Chark 2023 is the norm as opposed to 2022.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I think there's also a chance that Brenden Rice would play over that version of DJ Chark. But
yeah,
again, it's a lot of ifs there, a lot of having to sort things out. So it's fascinating, and it's going to be fascinating because, do you play DJ Chark in the preseason? And if you do, like, who's his quarterback? Do you play Quentin Johnston, and who's his quarterback, and who's the offensive lineman? It's going to be fascinating to watch at training camp. That's really like the only chance I think they're going to have to sort things out that way.
Yeah, if we find out that Chark isn't playing in the preseason and Johnston is, we know who the wide receiver 3 is at that point.
Yeah, facts.
Even if it's a vet minimum thing, like, you got to find out. That battle would be over. But if they do play them, yeah, I think Johnston. I don't know about Davis. Like, what more do you need to know about Davis in the preseason as a receiver? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you try to get Johnston, Rice, and Chark out there in the preseason.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think Davis is like your wide receiver 6 and special teams gadget player. Like, I think that's who he is. So
yeah, locked in role. Will make the team. Will be on the team. No questions for years as long as he's healthy. But yeah, not necessarily a productive receiver.
Yeah, there were some people that were like, oh, like they drafted some other guys who could return. It's like, well, the special teams coach handpicked Derius Davis to be his returner. Like, I think Derius Davis is here to stay. So
yes, I mean, they signed an undrafted free agent quarterback who can throw, but we're gonna go with the guy who's good at it for sure.
Yeah. So I would say offensively, this is probably the most interesting battle for me, just because I have like no idea where it can go. There's so many different possibilities. Whereas I feel like the right guard spot is pretty cut and dry, things like that. So we'll kind of see how it goes.
I will die if it ends up being Simi Fehoko, just 300 yards in the preseason.
Hey, man, he's like, Simi Fehoko is playing this the right way. He is hanging out all day long with Justin Herbert, and they're going out to eat with all the linemen, and Simi Fehoko is just right there. So props to Simi. He knows how to play it. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Running back 2, returning, obviously, of Isaiah Spiller, drafted in 2022. Elijah Dotson, undrafted free agent. Home run hitter, Elijah Dotson, if you will. Signed J.K. Dobbins and then drafted Kamani Vidal. And I think they had a futures contract on a running back, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, I can't remember who that is off the top of my head right now. But this is obviously the players on the screen here are the main guys. I think how much of a healthy version of J.K. Dobbins you're getting that's the biggest question for me. And if he is healthy, I think he's kind of the guy here. Are you kind of viewing the same way?
Yeah, this is not much of a discussion. It's J.K. Dobbins. If he's healthy and he's cleared to go, he's the running back 2. There's just too much evidence. I wish there were more, but too much evidence of him playing well with this scheme with Greg Roman. Yeah, I think this is a pretty easy one.
Yeah, and I think RB3 is like they drafted Kamani Vidal. They didn't draft these other guys. So I think the interesting thing here is, can Elijah Dotson do enough in the preseason to make them carry 4 running backs? Because I think he just has a little bit of a different type of potential role. Like I think he could do a lot of the Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell type things because of his speed. Can he do that enough? Can he make enough of an impact to earn another roster spot again, like he did last year? That to me is like a bigger question than running back too. Like I think you have to have the conversation. If J.K. Dobbins is not healthy, then what happens?
Mm-hmm.
But assuming health, I think the biggest curiosity for me is what can Elijah Dotson do to potentially earn a roster here?
Yeah, in terms of the most early playable possible role that's very different than the guys ahead of him, Dotson is definitely that as a twitchy scat kind of back type. You and I think Arjun, everybody, we were messaging about like who's the third down guy, and it's not really set in stone. That's not really Vidal. That's not really Dobbins. That's not Gus Edwards. Not that they will never play on third down, but like that's not quite them. I think that's Dotson. The only concern maybe is if they feel like they want to have the bigger body that Spiller probably is in the rotation, because, okay, let's say Edwards goes down. Vidal's not a big guy. Dobbins is an oft injured guy. So you got to have someone there with a bit more size who just, hey, we need someone to carry the football. Wow, what an endorsement.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the argument for Spiller. But at this point, yeah, I think it's just you're trying to figure out who the best remaining receiving back option is. And I kind of think that could be Dotson of the two.
Yeah. So appreciate Joseph here. Jarrett Patterson, former University of Buffalo standout, is the running back of choice. But like he says, I tend to agree that's probably a camp body.
Yeah.
So if J.K. Dobbins, like I guess with the Dobbins conversation, what percentage of him healthy is enough for you to say he's clear-cut RB2 versus like if he's 60% of his former self, is he still that clear-cut RB2, or at that point is that Vidal's spot to earn? I know that's like hard to quantify.
Right. Yeah, no, that's I still think that makes Dobbins RB2 unless you're telling me he got hurt again and that's why he's 60% of himself. If he's just never going to be the 100% that he was, and I doubt he will be, but he's still 70%, so that by the math of what he averaged per carry, I guess that's like 4.4 yards per carry or something. Okay. So if you tell me that is RB2, yeah, I think he's RB2.
Yeah. I think there's a good chance that Vidal plays early. And JK has obviously had his injury issues. Running back in general, like there's going to be some missed games from this group, even if everybody stays, season-ending injury-free. It's just such a position of attrition. So Vidal was going to play, and I think he's going to have a role. But I think him becoming RB2 is more of a 2025 conversation.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
All right, last one here. Tight end number 4/fullback. Again, you guys get the deep cuts around here. We're assuming that Will Dissly, Hayden Hurst, and Donald Parham are your tight ends 1 through 3. Maybe potentially might be putting a little too much stock into Donald Parham.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like he is a very different profile than anybody else on the roster. I do tend to think that carries some weight and his ability as a pass catcher. So we'll see what happens there. I don't think his role is necessarily like 100% guaranteed, but I'm definitely taking him over at tight end 3 over the other ones on the option, ones on the roster here. So other returning tight end is obviously Stone Smart. They signed Ben Mason to be a tight end /fullback is how he's listed on the roster. You have Zach Hines and Luke Benson, the undrafted free agents here. So it's going to be, I guess, curious to see what Greg Roman does with this kind of role, because in Baltimore, he had Patrick Ricard, who was a former defensive tackle that he turned into a fullback. And before that, they drafted Kyle Juszczyk. So how much weight does the fullback position and role actually carry for this team? I think is the best way to maybe frame this conversation.
I think it will matter enough because I don't think you go get Ben Mason and just to like have him for funsies. Like I think they will try to develop the fullback role. With that said, it's not like anyone's taken Ben Mason and played him more than 3 snaps in any game or even his entire career.
More than 1 snap.
Yes. So we'll see. I do think they're going to try to look for, if it's not a 4th tight end, which might make it maybe more so Zach Hines, I think it is more of a fullback kind of role. They could go 4 tight ends and 1 fullback as well. It's very possible. To me, we discussed him as like best option of UDFAs to make the roster. I know Ben Mason has the familiarity. It's great. He played for Baltimore and for Michigan. That definitely gives him a step. But I think Luke Benson steps on the field and shows out the athletic profile and the blocking. I think it just becomes a bit too enticing for them to pass up. I don't think Ben Mason is as secure. If this were like the Steelers signing Derek Watt, to that contract back in the day, and like that was the money here and there was veteran experience, yeah, then like Derek Watt's your starter, obviously. But with Ben Mason, like he's got 1 more snap in the NFL than Luke Benson, who just is a rookie. So I think he doesn't have enough veteran stock and familiarity weight to win out just because of that over Luke Benson. So people like Hines quite a bit. I get it. Having 500 receiving yards is better than Luke Benson's like 84. But I promise, after the chore that was 3 hours of blocking film, where he was not even the primary tight end for Georgia Tech, I think that he is the best option here as a blocking option.
Certainly the most versatile blocker. I would tend to agree there. I think Hines is kind of redundant with Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst. And I think, obviously Stone Smart's not a guy that's going to be confused as a blocker. So I think this does ultimately become Benson as well. I think he just gives them the most, flexibility and can do more things. Like I think if you watch very different physical profiles, right? But Patrick Ricard, he lines up as a tight end. He lines up as an H-back. He lines up as a traditional fullback. They move him around the formation. I think Ben Mason is like, I know he's listed technically as a tight end / fullback, but he's a fullback. Like he is 100% a fullback. So I think if your goal is to get more versatility out of that specific role, I think that is Luke Benson. And also I think that translates to a greater special teams potential as somebody who can play different roles on special teams. So Ben Mason is more physical. He's more traditional, and maybe that wins out. But I kind of tend to agree that they should be looking for more versatility and athleticism. And that to me is Luke Benson as well.
Yep, I agree.
All righty then. Certainly not expecting that show to go an hour long, but that's us, right? I always say that, and then we always go longer. So, Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out?
We are in the dead of the offseason, baby. We've got a few more OTAs to go. And OTAs now might get pushed next year, which will make May to June kind of an ugly month and a half or so. But yeah, we are in that time period. I see notifications from other Chargers content creators. I'm like, yeah, that's a dead of the offseason kind of topic. Like we're in that part. So thank you guys for even being here and listening to us. My students, there's no way you're still here. There's no way you listen to us talk about
they're gone. They're not sticking around for an hour and 4 minutes of that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's cool to see your teacher on here. Yeah.
All righty. So like Tyler mentioned, this is officially the dog days of summer, and we'll have some good content for you guys. Obviously, we're not taking it off, at least not yet. But wanted to get this conversation out of the way. On Thursday, we're going to have a little bit of a different conversation. Bill Barnwell had a great article today about the offseason superlatives. He thinks that the Chargers are going to be the team most likely to make a midseason trade in the AFC. So on Thursday, we're going to talk about some potential options that the Chargers could potentially look at in terms of a midseason acquisition. We know that Joe Ortiz believes in making those midseason acquisitions, so should be a fun conversation. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Make sure to like, review, rate, subscribe. All that good stuff does help continue to grow the show. And this has been another episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. We'll see you next time. As always, bolt up.